Welcome back to the Alts Podcast. I'm your host, Horacio Ruiz. We bring you industry leaders and creators to give their insights on the rapidly changing and exciting world of alternative assets. Opinions expressed on this podcast by the host and podcast guests are for informational purposes only and should not be considered investment advice. Podcast hosts and guests may maintain positions in the offerings discussed in this podcast. The intro song, Fishing for Pets, is written and composed by Alan Goldshire from his latest release, Live at the Lakeview Lounge. All right, guys, so we're very happy today, very fortunate to talk to Mr. Jonah Reynolds. He's the CEO of Pangea Builders. Jonah, thank you for coming on the pod.
Thank you for having me.
I was looking through, different things to guests to have on the show, and Pangea Builders really struck me. You guys are building what you call Earthships, which sounds totally futuristic and awesome. But I kind of want to let you kind of describe what it is that Pangea Builders does, what the model is behind the Earthships, and sort of like your mission behind that.
Yeah, sure. So we build Earthships and other off-grid homes. Earthships are just one model. We take what we've learned from the Earthship, which is a completely off-grid building that is form follows function. It looks a certain way. It has to have a certain layout, a certain floor plan. And we take all that and the systems and apply it to conventional floor plans. A craftsman, a colonial, a rancher, these types of floor plans that we've all been living in for hundreds of years. To make them more sustainable and potentially off-grid. So by off-grid, I mean we build buildings that make all of their own utilities. So it makes its own power from the sun. It has batteries with solar panels so that it can have power at night and all that. It catches all of its water from the sky in climates where you get enough precipitation. And so that's all water for household use. And then it treats all of the wastewater on site in botanical cells and reuses water 3 to 4 times and flushes the toilet with treated gray water. The building heats and cools itself, and it also grows some food. So it's off-grid on every single system. And so we build both Earthships, we build custom homes, we build straw bale homes, we build conventional floor plan homes, and make them as sustainable as possible.
When you mentioned that you're completely off-grid, and you mentioned about, sort of recycling the rain, using the rainwater, having the wastewater. Are these buildings meant to be in certain locations where, like you mentioned, where there's enough rain? What happens if you have an Earthship somewhere where there isn't a whole lot of rain? What happens to the water supply there? Or are the buildings made so efficient that, you don't need that much water really to operate that part of the house?
Right. So we're designing and building Earthships and other off-grid buildings here in Los Angeles, California. And it doesn't get enough precipitation each year to catch enough water for household use. It just doesn't. There's not enough rain that comes from the sky. So the cutoff is right around 10 to 12 inches of rain per year. That's how much precipitation you need per year. So in climates where you don't have that, or it's cloudy all the time, or the sun doesn't quite come up high enough, during the day when you're closer to the poles, for example, way in northern Canada. Any type of climactic adjustment that the building needs to make that impacts its systems, you just adjust for it, and then you can have a conventional backup, if you will. So when you don't have enough water falling from the sky, you have to have city water or the well. Well, you're still catching some water from the sky, so you're going to use that much less water each year. And your building is already recycling water. It's using it 2 or 3, 4 times. It's flushing the toilet with treated gray water that you did the dishes in the day before. So it's okay where there are places that you can't have the full system to be completely off-grid. And sometimes it's just a decision that's made, not necessarily because of the climate. It's just the nature of the site, the views. Who knows what it is? So the buildings adapt And if they're 10% off grid, it's making a huge difference in the world as opposed to being 100% off grid.
Yeah, and I guess if you when you mention that, right, I'm sure you have these models that are 100% off grid. There are certain locations where that's sustainable, and the homes are almost become a part of the landscape, right?
Right.
Um, what what about if you're working somewhere? Because this is kind of where I'm seeing the future of it, right? Um, an urban landscape, like you said, Los Angeles, but like urban, right? Like where you're right smack in the middle of a city. Um, could you use those technologies that you use for certain homes, those completely off grid homes? Could you use that and retrofit it into other homes that are surrounded by basically just concrete and other buildings?
Yeah, you can. That's a very good question. It's a good point. Just like we take these systems and apply them to conventional floor plans, we take these systems and apply them to existing buildings. So we can renovate and remodel the entire building and strip it down to its main structure, and replace it with more walls that have thermal mass in them, for example. Uh, or it's just a small retrofit where we're adding solar power and a greenhouse with the gray water planner. So there's many different levels of retrofit, and the most sustainable building is the building that's already built. So we're going to make a bigger impact if we retrofit our buildings rather than build new ones.
That's a good point. When you say thermal mass, could you define what that is? Is that kind of like the foundation of the home?
It's thermal mass is any earth type material. And so when you have a home built of stick frame, like 2x4s or 2x6s, that's not thermal mass. It's wood. Wood is like insulation. And then you have big cavities between the studs of the wood also. So when you replace your frame walls with thermal mass walls, the same thickness and the same look, you bring in more thermal mass, and that can be concrete, that can be rammed earth, rock, tile for the floors, that type of thing. Any earth type material. Concrete is just easy and it's a good replacement. Um, you add more thermal mass, and then the temperature becomes a lot more stable. So it'll force your building to stay closer to the constant average of about 70 degrees, which is about room temperature. And so when you replace most or all of your walls with thermal mass, you get a more stable temperature, and that's one part of all the systems. That's the heating and cooling system.
Wow. So you're basically able to build these homes without a heating or a cooling system, and you're saying like it'll adapt to the environment, and so that the inside of your home is always going to be a constant temperature.
Yeah, that's correct. When you use enough thermal mass with enough insulation and the right configuration, your building will stay comfortable without any forced electric heating or cooling system. Now, it can't hurt to have some kind of air conditioner mini split thing on the wall and throw a switch and feel cold air. It's okay to have that because that thing runs on electricity and that's running off of your solar power system. We like to have a switch and some cool or hot air. It's okay to have that.
Yeah. Um, could you take me through like I guess a renovation, right? And I'm thinking in terms of kind of our audience, um, adding value, right? And so you said that you made an interesting point where the most sustainable homes are the ones that are already built. That means that I guess I take it from that you're kind of implying you're not creating more waste, right? Or you're not creating more supply, more material to build a new home. Is So when people are looking to kind of maybe retrofit their home or redo it in a way that's a little bit more sustainable, do you find that that's adding value to the home? Do you find that saves a ton of money over time? A little bit
Yeah,
about.
well, making any home more green is going to add more value.
Mhm.
It's going to make it more resilient to potential disasters that may come up, or potential maintenance breakage, situations like um, a water main down the street can pop. Well, that's going to affect all the houses downstream from that. Um,
Yeah.
and maybe a transformer blows up down the street. That's going to affect the power systems of on-grid buildings. So when a home retrofits the green way, kind of a thing, it's going to make the home more green, more independent, more resilient to disasters or accidents that may happen, and so that's a more valuable home when you have that. And so that makes insurance companies like an energy independent home better, because the chance of it going through a disaster and failing are a lot less. It's going to survive a disaster and not be a total loss and not require so much damage. So it brings a lot more value, and there are a considerable more amount of resources and materials that go into a brand new home as opposed to just retrofitting an existing home.
And when you're putting in these when you are retrofitting, are you also, because of kind of like the nature of your company, are you using a lot of reusable materials or materials that are recycled?
Well, getting recycled materials, it takes more time, and time is money. And sometimes the materials can cost more money. And
Okay.
so if it fits in with the timeline and the budget, then yeah, we're going to use as much recycled materials as we can. Um, but most of the energy, embodied energy and used energy in a home is during the operation, not so much during construction. So it's good to use recycled materials, and it does make a difference, but it makes more of a difference by getting the home built and having it operate, and that's where the real efficiencies are saved.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to what you said before because I wanted to ask that question, but um, when you talk about people building their bunkers, being kind of doomsday preppers and all that, and basically your motto is you don't have to do any of that. You already are living in it, right? Because you're already off grid. You're already off grid, and you're already kind of living in a sustainable way where the home doesn't depend on the grid, right?
Right,
So
you're more independent.
yeah, that's an interesting point. That's an interesting point. Um, what has your market been? Do you see? Are you looking at people that are looking to kind of change sort of like their lifestyle, do something where they move away from the city entirely, and they want to build a new home where they don't really have to be too much in contact? Or do you find that a lot of the builds that you do are kind of like some sort of retreats where people can get away for a couple of months?
It's really all of the above.
Okay.
There really isn't a segment of the market that isn't interested in a more sustainable building.
Hmm.
So we see everybody wanting this type of a building.
Gotcha. Does that also include? Because I know you've mentioned before. Does that include? And I kind of alluded to that. Inner cities, governments. Do they come to you when they're looking to start a new project and kind of want to get your input on how to make things greener and more self-sustainable?
Getting into the cities is more difficult, but it requires a lot of pushing and a lot of prodding, and so we're able to get more sustainable methods, sustainable systems in the cities, but it's a lot harder.
Yeah, you mentioned a build that you had in West Philadelphia. I think I caught that maybe that you did that maybe a year or two ago. Could you talk about that a little bit? Kind of how you were able to get in there and how that build went?
Well, the whole idea is with the design of these buildings is that they fit existing code already.
Hmm.
And so it's really just a matter of making sure that the drawings fit a certain format and a certain look, because they meet code already. Um, and so it's really nothing special or different that has to be done. It's just adhering to the codes and the regulations, providing construction drawings that meet those codes, providing permit drawings that meet those codes and those standards, and having an architect, having an engineer, and a permit is issued.
So if someone's living, let's say, in a suburban home, and they want to retrofit their home, and I know you talk about different budgets, um, is there something that's kind of available for everybody where they can do like a certain part of their home to where they're not entirely off grid, but say, I'm interested in doing something where maybe the water system is self-sustainable. We get enough water here in this area, and then you can make the water completely off grid without necessarily doing other components. or they want to make their home a little bit better, more insulated, right? Um, what are the levels that you offer? Like if there's a homeowner that's interested in getting involved with this.
Right. It's really any system or all of the systems. There's the systems that we have are heating and cooling, and
Hmm.
that's more thermal mass and more insulation. The other system is electricity. That's just solar power. The other system is water supply, and that's catching the water off the roof. The other system is wastewater treatment, and that's having a greenhouse and a gray water planter. So you can have some or all of those systems and take your building 5%, 10%, 50%, 80%, or 100% off grid.
Wow. And I imagine that something like with insulation, that would be a pretty heavy project, right? Because I mean, you're basically putting the thermal mass all over the home. You'd have to tear it down.
Yeah, that's tearing it down to its structure.
Okay.
If you want to replace all of the interior frame walls with thermal mass, the other option is that we can just wrap the building in thermal mass and insulation, and that can make a difference. So it doesn't have to be a complete tear down. So there's ways to do it. We would add a lot more insulation to the roof. Um, so it really just depends on the situation, on if the client wants to live there or leave the building so that we can work on it, if the budget will allow, because a complete teardown costs more, but it leaves most of the structure in place.
Yeah. Um, what sort of, and I'm just curious, like how would Pangea Builders be different from like traditional solar companies? Because right now I get a solar company representatives coming to my door like once a month, and I'm wondering if you had some insights regarding that, like in terms of solar panels, the state of that industry, and kind of how some companies go about, the benefits, the pros and cons, right, of that, and how maybe you do it a little bit different
Right.
than maybe some other companies.
Right. So only adding a solar power system onto your building is going to cost a lot of money because a conventional building is extremely inefficient. It needs a giant HVAC system to keep it cool and to keep it warm. It uses a lot of electricity. So if we can retrofit the building with thermal mass and insulation so that it uses a lot less energy, then doing a solar power system is worth it because it doesn't have to be nearly as big. Now, solar power systems have to be installed by locally licensed solar power installers. And that's who we work with also. But we always recommend doing a retrofit of heating and cooling in addition to solar power because it makes a big difference that way.
It's more sustainable. Um, how about I guess the last thing with that is you have such a home that's kind of, in my idea, in my mind, I feel like the thermal mass, there's a great deal of innovation there, and different technology, maybe technology that's not so common, right? Um, that's maybe one part of the question. The other part is then what happens if a homeowner, in terms of repairs, what happens if there's a problem with the water system, or there's a problem with the thermal mass? Like, how readily available are there experts in the field to come out and kind of um, work on those repairs?
Right. Well, the catch water system is all conventional plumbing. It's just a different design. Same thing with the wastewater system. So any plumber can come and troubleshoot any kind of a problem, any clog, any leak, or anything like that. That's fine. Um, the thermal mass is just concrete or rammed earth. There's really nothing to happen there. It's just a wall. So there's no real troubleshooting of it. The insulation part, that's just a whole bunch of insulation in your roof and some in your walls also. So that really doesn't have any maintenance or anything to do. So it's really just the plumbing and your solar power system, and both of those there's plenty of local experts that can troubleshoot.
Okay. I want to talk about a different part of your what Pangea does is you actually invite people to come out to your builds, and I'm assuming that you are assuming that these are people that are interested in building design, maybe architects, maybe even like you mentioned plumbers, people in construction. Um, why do you invite people to come out to your builds? And what do you see it working from there? Like what comes out of it?
Well, it's very important that more and more people learn about these systems, especially tradespeople, because they can start designing them in, and architects, they can start designing them into their projects. So where we can, we bring in students and volunteers to help us build, to learn. We have classroom time, we have textbooks, and we teach these systems and how to design them and how to build them.
And you do these classes like where do you build? I mean, because you build all over the place, I imagine. Is it sort of like experiential learning where people are on site and you're holding class like at the build?
Yeah, they're on site, and they're working the project just like the rest of the laborers, and they get their hands dirty, and it's really hands on, and they're doing everything with guidance. And at the beginning of the day or the end of the day or at lunchtime, we'll sit down, we'll go over designs, we'll go over the textbook about what we're learning, and so students can have a very hands on experience, and then graduate, if you will, at the end of the build. And they're not ready to build a complete building after going through one build. It takes a few builds for it to really sink in. But we bring the students on when we can, and they learn very well.
Um, I mentioned this before, and it's kind of like I see this big opportunity, right? And I don't know if this is something that you're even necessarily interested in right now or focused on, but when I think about this, I think about the potential for these large developments, right? The suburban developments. And I'm originally from Miami, and so I could talk about the urban sprawl, right? I mean, cookie cutter homes being created left and right, taking over miles of Everglades swamp, and I just thought about, well, what are the opportunities there for Pangea to be involved or something like that, where what you're doing, where you're bringing in these off grid concepts can be applied by these major home builders, or is that something that's kind of pie in the sky kind of thinking?
Well, it's something that definitely should be done, but the frame buildings that are built, 100 of them at the time at a time, they're designed and built to be as cheap as possible. And so you kind of you really you get what you pay for. You're not going to get any systems, and it's just going to be built as fast and as cheap as possible. And so sustainable systems, they take a little bit more time and cost a little bit more money, but they save a lot more in the operation of the building. So it really benefits the homeowner a little bit more, and the developer and the builders a little bit less.
Yeah, and that basically is just basically a cost benefit for the company.
Right.
You know, um, do you see, or could you talk about certain cities or governments that are putting a greater emphasis on your kind of building philosophy?
Every location is really doing their part. No one's really doing it fast enough. But I can say there are good things that California is doing, where every new home has to have solar power. I can say equally good things about the East Coast. It needs to be done a lot faster.
Yeah. Two more questions, Jonah, and they're kind of a little bit more lighthearted. Could you take me through maybe one of your favorite builds, something that was maybe more challenging or was in a certain location, where the building itself was just awesome, or maybe the view was awesome?
Yeah, so our favorite builds are always the ones that we do internationally. So I keep coming back to a project we did in Haiti, disaster relief project after the earthquake, and it was a really intense 11-day build, and we built a demonstration home, and got to work with a bunch of locals who were living in the tent camps, and did the most simple, sustainable building that we can think of, and it was really an eye-opening and educational experience, because we got to show these people that that how a sustainable building can be built, really nice, really strong, that can withstand the next earthquake. So those projects are always our favorite.
That's I definitely, you definitely took it in another direction, and probably made it more interesting. What drove you to go do that in Haiti? Um, and what kind of supplies or materials did you use to them for people there to be able to replicate that?
So it's the same materials, it's the same supplies. Each system is just on a much smaller and simpler scale. So in 11 days, we excuse me, we had a building up that can catch all of its own water and clean it, that can treat all of its own wastewater, that has a flush toilet, that heats and cools itself. So we have to have the systems really, really simple so that we can build them fast. They don't meet Western building codes. It's much simpler. They're super safe and just fine, but Western building codes can be very restrictive. And so after any disaster, the most important things that you need as fast as possible is quick, strong shelter and good, clean, potable water. And both of those things must be done quickly and must be able to be done by most, if not all, of the population. And so we taught how to build these buildings, which are very simple to build, with these systems. And so that's kind of a disaster relief program that we have, where any disaster that happens around the world, we'll start reaching out and try and find a connection so that we can get a piece of land and go build, and we raise money, or someone from that location will call us up and bring us
Um, have you been involved with something like that in the states? I'm thinking. I'm thinking what happened after Hurricane Katrina in parts of New Orleans, and there were tons of rebuild. I know Brad
in.
Pitt, for
Right.
example, had a big project there, and had that sort of these futuristic homes that could almost float if they had to.
We
Um,
did a building in Mexico
okay.
that was affected by Hurricane Katrina, but again, it's the especially for disasters. There's so much bureaucratic red tape that you have to jump through in order to get a building built, that by the time you get there and build something, it's almost too late. And so these buildings are different, and in a disaster situation, it can be problematic to get a building built in the Western world, whereas pretty much everywhere else, it's understood that it's a disaster relief project, and so we can just get in there and build it really easy and really quick.
Um, I guess my final question is, um, how has Pangea Builders? I know you guys have your company's been around now for 60 years, kind of when it started. Um, how has it evolved? And how do you view yourselves as a company? I mean, obviously, you guys are builders, you guys are architects, designers, um, but do you almost view yourself like you're sort of, you have a mission to kind of change the way that things are done? Or do you just kind of see this as hey, this is a great business. I'm passionate about this, and wherever it goes, it goes.
Yeah, our company's been around for about 10 years.
Oh, okay.
The Earthship concept itself has been around for about 50.
Gotcha.
Uh, and so we just build off grid buildings. We're for the mainstream. We're trying to get into the mainstream and build as many homes as possible, and get into other developers so that they can start building this way. Um, and hopefully we'll be able to make some change. It's by using less frame and all that, less framing. But the goal is really just to be another architecture and construction firm, because we're a design build company, but we build buildings that are sustainable at any level, just a little bit or completely off grid. And through our education programs, we bring in experts in the field to learn from us so that they can bring it back home and offer it to their clients.
That's awesome. Well, Jonah, thank you so much for sharing what Pangea does, what Pangea Builders does. What if people want to contact you, if they're interested in learning more about your company, where can they go? Your website? Are you active on social media?
Yeah, our website is at pangeabuilders.com, PANGEA builders.com. and you can get in touch with us there and see all about us.
Awesome. Well, Jonah, thank you very much. It was great talking to you. Jonah Reynolds, again, he's the CEO at Pangea Builders. Thanks for being on the podcast.
All right, thank you. Take care.
If you get a chance to visit PangeaBuilders.com, please go ahead and do so. It's amazing what kind of homes they build and how they build it. I really felt a great deal about Jonah's trip to Haiti, where he shared his building methods to improve living conditions in a land that was completely devastated following the 2010 earthquake. It is my hope that other governments, both domestic and abroad, can tap into Jonah's resources to build better and smarter. If you enjoyed today's podcast, let others know about it. We find our guests so interesting and knowledgeable, and I know others will too. Or leave a review or hit the follow button. Until the next episode, take care.